So today I've been making hot watercress pastry, and hot watercress pastry traditionally used for making pork pies. Well, I've got a couple of great fillings that I'm going to do today for pies that can be eaten cold and also hot. Two fillings that use really good British ingredients. So I've got some pork, some free-range pork with a little bit of fat left on it, and some pigeon. So my first pie is going to be pigeon and pork pie that I'm going to jelly to be eaten cold. And then I've got some lamb mince that I'm going to put with lamb gravy that I made from stock earlier on in the week, a little bit of mint, and that one is a hot pie. And rather than hand raise them, I've got these great moulds that I'm going to use. So I'm going to put the pastry to one side and leave that for a minute while I make the fillings. So the first thing I'm going to do is chop the pork. You want a little bit of fat in the pork to keep it nice and moist. And I'm just going to chop it fairly coarsely. I don't want to mince in this pie. I like to see the pieces. What the fat on the pork will also do is keep the pigeon moist, because pigeon is a very, very delicate meat. I'm using the breast of pigeon, and you want to keep it from overcooking, because the pastry does require about 3/4 of an hour cooking time. When these pork and pigeon pies are jellied, I want to be able to see the definition in the meat once it's been cooked. So the pork's going into a bowl. So I'm cubing, rough dicing the pork. The pigeon I'm going to cut in strips so that I can see it running through the pie. Nearly finished the pork. So that goes into my bowl there. And then I'm using 2 pigeon breasts that I get from a really good fishmonger, strangely enough, on one of the markets that we work at. I'm going to keep those in fairly large pieces, as I said, because they're quite delicate, and you'll get probably 4 or 5 strips to a pie, depending on the size of the pigeon breasts. Okay. So to that mixture of pigeon and pork, I've got some sage. So I've got some red sage that's going to go in. So I'm going to roughly chop the sage. Again, I want to be able to see the sage in the pie, so I don't want it too fine. This is a chiffonade, so strips of the sage. And this is quite a simple filling, beautiful ingredients. So the sage goes into the meat like that, and a liberal amount of salt and pepper. Then I'm going to combine those ingredients together. As long as all the sage is amalgamated, that's all you want really. And an equal distribution of pork and pigeon, but you can do that once you put it into the moulds. So that's going to be put to one side. Might make room on the table. And then in my other bowl, I've got my lamb. I'm using a spoon to do this because I've just chopped my pork. To the lamb, I'm going to add nutmeg. So I'm going to grate the nutmeg. There's some mace in the lamb stock, which is the outer husk of the nutmeg, but a completely different flavour. So I'm going to put a really good grating of nutmeg in. I've got some vinegar, so this is a blackberry vinegar, and I'm just going to put a couple of teaspoons in, and that just takes some of the richness out of the lamb, because the lamb will be quite rich. So literally just a couple of teaspoons of vinegar. And on a separate board with a separate knife, I'm going to chop half of a red onion. This half an onion I'm going to split between the two fillings. Only need half an onion really, don't need any more than that. So I'm going to put a little bit in the lamb mixture, and then probably 2/3 into the pork mixture. The other thing I've got to go in my lamb is some red mint. So I'm not going to put too much mint in, so that I don't want it to overpower the flavour of the lamb, but mint obviously goes really well with lamb, so that will just add a different depth. And again, I want to see that mint. It will cook down. I want to be able to see it in the pie. I'll put that in with the lamb. So that's the mixture that I've got now. And to that, salt and pepper. Quite a lot of salt. A fair whack of pepper. And then what I'm also going to do, but not until I assemble the pie, I'm going to put the really good lamb stock in with that as well. But I'm going to mix these ingredients together. The lamb, little bit of onion, the mint, the vinegar, salt and pepper, just to make sure that they're all amalgamated, so that you get an equal distribution of everything throughout the pie. Okay. So we're good to go with those. I'm going to have a wipe down, put these in the fridge, and then roll out my pastry. So I've wiped down and washed my hands, changed my board, and I've cut my hot water crust pastry into 8. I've cut the large piece into 4 initially, and then I've got 4 more to put in there. So I made this morning, so I'm using it from cold, but actually it is pliable, so it was made earlier on, so there's no need to use it from warm, as a lot of the recipes say. First thing I'm going to do before I roll out my pastry is I'm going to grease my little moulds. So I've got some rapeseed oil, and with a pastry brush I'm going to liberally coat the insides of my mould so that the pies don't stick. and also the outsides of the mould where the crust edge will be, because that tends to stick. Make sure there's plenty on there. And set those to one side. And then I'm going to put a little bit of flour on my board. Hot watercress pastry, unlike short crust, likes a warm temperature. It doesn't like to be cold, but what it also has is an insatiable appetite for flour. So the more flour that you put on a board, as you warm your pastry up, the lard starts to melt, and it will absorb the flour, and it will change the composition of the pastry. So you won't necessarily notice it happens until you start to try and mould it, and you'll find that the pastry becomes very dry and crumbly. And so the more flour you put on the board, as the pastry warms up, the more it's going to absorb the flour and change the texture of the pastry completely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out my first piece of pastry, and I want a rectangle. And this pastry is quite rich, so I don't want massive thickness on this. I am going to chill these before I cook them, because the lard is still fairly close to the surface of the pastry at the moment, and it will burn if it's not chilled sufficiently prior to cooking. Although we are going to cook it on quite a low temperature. It's going to be about 140 centigrade. I think that's gas mark 1. That's the pastry in the first tin. It needs a little bit more of a roll. Misjudged that a bit. It is quite elastic, so it does contract. Hurrah, we're there. I'm just going to use my fingers to mould the pastry in, because I have oiled the tin, so it is quite slippery. Making sure that I'm covering all the sides fully. There used to be a pork pie called a growler, and this shape is very, very similar to the old growler pork pie. So that's the first mould done. I'll do the second one. So I'm going to chill these for about an hour before I cook them. And then I'm going to cook them for 45 minutes to low heat. There's quite a lot of fat in this pastry, so it doesn't stick too badly. Ooh, table wobbled a bit there. Pushing the corners out well so that you don't get a thick crease in the corners of the pie. There's both the moulds done. Just check that they're covered sufficiently so the pastry is not too thin on the edges. Excellent. Good. So from the fridge then, First one I'm going to do is the lamb, and I'm going to pack this in fairly well. I want a nice firm filling, lots of lamb in it. So don't worry about not being too generous with this because it will cook down. So there's my lamb. And to that, because it is packed in fairly well, just do the one for now. I'm going to add a couple of spoons of this really good lamb stock. And that during cooking, that will just create a great gravy. There's some carrots in this, some onion, some mace, the lamb bones, and some water. And a bouquet garni, so the normal bay leaves, thyme, parsley. That's super. So that's that one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tap it on the table to get rid of any air pockets. And then the second one, different spoon because it's pork. I'm going to mix my onion in with my pork and pigeon. I want an even distribution of the pork and the pigeon. It escaped. One more bit of pigeon in that one, I think. And that's my second one. Again, put to one side. A little bit more flour on my board. And I want 2 rough rectangles. Of pastry. You want to completely seal the top and have enough to right across. So we're good to go with the lamb one. I'm going to cover that, and then I'm going to push down around the edges of the pie to seal it initially. I'm going to trim the edges. And then I'm going to just crimp the edge of the pie using my finger. And then just a couple of air holes. So that's my lamb one. and I'll go on to decorate that once I've rolled out the second lid. A little bit more flour. Get that out of the way. It doesn't have to be too precise, this. As long as you've got enough to cover, you can trim it and then use your trimmings to make decoration. It's quite elastic, this pastry. Goes over the top like that. Again, I'm just going to secure the pastry. Quick crimp. The crimp at this stage just to keep the pastry lid down. Do something a little bit more elaborate in a moment or two. So my pigeon pie is going to have 1 steam hole and my lamb 2. So I'm going to decorate those and then pop them in the oven. So all ready for the oven. 2 that have been moulded, and then 2 that I've very quickly hand raised. I'm going to cook those for 45 minutes. So we'll see what they look like when they come out, as this is a bit of a trial. Great pies, all done, ready for freezing, ready for eating, and ready for jellying.